No doubt will be others joining us. Well, welcome everybody. Now, to those who are new, just want to say that the topics that I deal with in these classes are some of the big issues that we have, in fact, in front of us, and we need to understand them in a bit more depth. Therefore, my format is essentially to talk about that topic, and today's case, it will be money laundering, and that sort of gives us a bit more insight than just having to read the headlines, for instance, quite often on such matters. Now, these are the topics that are of great importance to us. And just to recap, some of the earlier ones that I did was one on energy, in particular about electric cars, Tesla and so on. And then talked about reusable rockets, of course, the space program, SpaceX. And then talked about various other things to do with China, especially because China is a big force in our life now. We don't get too much of good reports on China, and one of the things that I do is to try and avoid just passing on the bad sort of news. I think there's a lot of good news there as far as China is concerned. So anyhow, a lot of these big topics I think are important to us. And of course, there was the other one that I normally bring in is technology, because my background is technology and so on. Therefore, it's a very important factor in our lives. And you can see, even today, we are doing Zoom and so on. Therefore, the big issues are important for us to understand a bit more. So today's topic, of course, is money laundering. We hear the term, but it is something that sort of passes us by usually, because quite often it is not covered in its full depth, if you like, by the press, because the big lobbies that are at work prevent all the bad publicity, if you like, that results from those people who are involved. And usually it's the big money people and so on that are involved in such affairs. Especially a lot of them are connected to politics and politicians, and we'll go into a little bit more detail as we progress. Now, let me just go into today's agenda. What I'm going to be covering today is this, essentially. Can you all hear me, by the way? Just put your thumb up if you can. Yeah? Yeah, good. So what we are going to be talking about is what is meant by money laundering. So we'll go through that very quickly. And also, how big is the global problem? Because in terms of numbers, it's quite important to be able to see whether they are sufficiently big to impact society in a big way. And of course, I say it is a very, very big problem. It's also interesting for us to know how did it all start. And it's interesting to go back a little bit to see how it came about. And that's interesting. And that's very much the responsibility of the City of London, in fact, to a large extent. They have been, in fact, instrumental in bringing about the vehicles for doing this type of laundering, if you like. But they don't call it money laundering banks, but they call them tax shelters or tax havens. And we'll see a little bit more about that. And we can also see what sort of responsibility the City of London actually has over these, because they are still within the jurisdiction of UK as whole, but it is a bit removed. And we'll look at the tax shelters, and there are quite a few. Now, I just mentioned this campaign finance. It's a sort of a little offshoot, I suppose, of, again, anonymous activity funding some very, very important activities. Now, campaign finance in USA is something that is happening in a big way. It has changed the whole sort of campaign of political parties, depending on the amount of money they get, and and moves were made, which has made this thing become a little anonymous, which wasn't the case before. So we'll talk about that maybe, and then we can look at and see what are the solutions here. Okay, so let's get the thing there. There's the money. Here we are. These are all notes which are circulating, which have this little, idea of them called the dirty money. They're dirty money because they are illegitimate. They are not part of the normal documentation of funds coming in and funds going out. They're all done underhand in such a way that nobody knows what's going on. Okay, we know that this is the problem, and also we should know right away that there is very little reluctance on the big powers, especially the big powers like USA and UK, to do anything about it. And we'll see why it is so. What actually happens is when some sort of thing comes to light, fines are paid, and some sort of they avoid U.S. sanctions and so on, and carry on as before in terms of just naming and shaming them, and all these things called SARs, which banks keep a complete record of, which are suspicious activity reports, SARs, and they're not acted upon. And of course, what happens is that when whistleblowers leak out a lot of information, those individuals are hounded and periodically jailed. So we can look at this cases of the Jersey senator who did come out, with all the information, and he was really hounded, over a period of years, sent to jail and so on. So whistleblowers are also discouraged from making any type of inroads in bringing out that information. So a lot of information comes out as leaks. And I'll just mention some of those leaks that have come out. Yeah, now these are the leaks we hear about. You remember the Paradise Papers, the Panama Papers, the Swiss leaks, and the Luxembourg leaks. We'll go into a little bit more about that later. Just see. So what does it do? Flagging suspicious activity. These SARs are not sort of acted upon. There's lots of them picked up by the banks, but they don't do anything about it. And the law enforcement is very lax on it. So the amount of illicit money that gets actually, confiscated is, minuscule percentage. So you can see it's hardly any activity that is being done. Now, what does it mean when you have this money floating around, washing all over the place? It leads to more and more corruption, which means because money then gets paid to people for doing all sorts of illegal actions and transactions and what have you. And they do it through these funds that are collected here through money laundering. And then, of course, it deprives these countries of legitimate tax revenues. So in a way, this money, when it leaves the documented type of legitimate, if you like, institutions and enters this illegitimate institutions, all under the guise of some little protection from the big powers, it loses a lot of legitimate tax revenue in that country itself. Like UK doesn't pick up too much of this revenue because most of the money goes to these jerseys and so on, and we lose here. So how does it work, this laundering? Just a very quick sort of recap on that. So what happens is hundreds of thousands of pounds of drug money goes to the bosses in cash. Now, this is where the cash is where it starts with, because people just give money to each other with no record of anything. And usually these are bribes and what have you that money accumulates, and also which results from not payment of taxes and all the other illegitimate stuff, that activity that you engage in. So that is a starting point. The transactions are starting with a dirty cash exchanging money, hands, if you like. And once the money is exchanged, where does it go? The gangs would then sort of go and buy, in one case, they go and buy gold. If you go to the Middle East, you can just buy gold by the tons, if you like, go to the markets over there. And once you buy these golds directly with cash, in fact, I've been to Abu Dhabi, and you can go to a cash-looking like machine and put some money in, and out comes a little ingot of gold. It's a bit like us putting, the card into the ATM and getting cash out. Well, in Abu Dhabi, where I saw this, you can put your credit card in as well, and out comes a little piece of gold. So, you can transfer a lot of gold is a very, easily available commodity, especially in the Middle East. So the cash then converts into gold to begin with. And then, of course, these fake receipts are given for that gold that you purchase. And then it moves into another, when they move it to another country. Now, this is where the gold transactions are taking place. Dubai is very rich in terms of such transactions. So the clean cash gets taken to money exchanges then. So once you've got the gold, and you are able to then sell the gold practically as for clean money, then it's transferred to the bank accounts all over the world. So once the gold gets transferred to good laundered money, then you can send it to all over the world. So now it makes it also impossible to trace the money back to the British drug deals that started that thing, if you like, in that cash transaction that took place. Now there's another picture essentially saying the same thing, but in one sort of sheet. Here the money gets paid to an individual, collection of dirty money. Then it's also dirty money integrates into the financial system through means of purchases that they do through gold and what have you. And then they transfer this money through these fake companies, and then they are able to use that money then to buy all the assets that one needs, luxury assets, and do all sorts of investments and so on. So the whole idea is convert the cash to some sort of gold-like commodity, then make it legitimate with these fake certificates or receipts, and deposit the money into the banks. And then the shell companies are then funded through these banks, and then it becomes white money by then. Here again, it's the same thing: collection of dirty money, placement in the bank, dirty money integration, the financial transfers through intermediate type of entities, and then purchase of luxury assets here. Similar sort of idea. Okay, now how do we get to know what's going on over there? Because this information is secret. It's not published. Nobody knows who's the owner of a particular asset. Now, this is the big thing about money laundering. Individuals are not necessarily named as to who the beneficiaries are. It's only companies which are very vaguely defined, and then sub companies, and then other companies in other jurisdictions. And therefore, it becomes impossible for anybody to know who's actually the owner or a beneficiary of the money. Just today, I heard, this year, just this week, there was something called Vincent leaks that from USA. The leak talked about banks that have been involved in transferring lots and lots of illicit money. And in one case, they identified 44 Indian banks who have in fact been involved in doing these illicit type of transfers. And the type of illicit transfers have some amount that was also mentioned in this case. That's, I think, to the tune of something, it's a smallish money that they mentioned, $1.5 billion were unaccounted for in terms of the bank books. And they want to know, where did that money go? So the questions are being asked. And that money, of course, has gone in to fund terrorist activities and all these, uh, you know, unsavory type of activities that are taking place. Like, for instance, when you have terrorism and purchase of arms and so on taking place, uh, that's the type of activity that this illicit money funds. So here, these banks are now being questioned by international bodies to say, where is that money? Please account for it. We want to know, everything where that money went, because there is a clear sort of thing here that they have used it for unsavory purposes, practices. Um, and then, of course, Paradise Papers that came in 2017. This is about corporate and individual lowering of taxes. You know what happens when corporates, have revenues derived in one country? They then sort of declare it in a lower tax country, and then they have that type of mechanism to shift and save taxes, if you like. And we've seen that, I think, recently also in the case of Google and Apple. They have collected vast sums of money here in UK, but they pay taxes in Ireland because the tax regime is much lower over there. So that is, again, a loose type of regulation that allows it to happen. Panama Papers, these are shell companies, drugs and illegal activities, real estate, all these are purchased by these people who are named in these Panama Papers. And I know I've shown you pictures of people in Pakistan who are involved in that. The Zardari family, the Bhutto family, and then the Sharif family, both of them have been in government. So they were named in here, or at least Nawaz Sharif's family was named along with Nawaz Sharif here. So Swiss leaks about HSBC, this is a scandal of private banking. And Luxembourg leaks registries of profits from elsewhere. So these are all the big names, the leaks that we have seen come out. Now, these are two big sort of money launderers because they collected so much dirty money from and looted the country that they had to sort of launder it and bring it out. And as a result of bringing it out, he's got 64 properties here in UK, apart from vast holdings elsewhere. And he's got about innumerable sort of interests. And he also owns a Churchill Hotel in Portman Square, which is about $6 billion worth, I think. So they've got, and apart from that, he's got enormous amounts of money. Like 34 sugar mills and thousands of arable land, which he didn't have, because in the beginning, I've met this guy, He at one time was just selling cinema tickets because his father owned a cinema in Pakistan, and he was touting for tickets. But then he became the president of the Pakistan at one time, all through sort of manipulation. Both of them did that. Yeah, these are the Panama Papers. That's the Sharif family here. They're in big trouble right now because Imran Khan is trying them through the courts. Um, and I think each day it's a sort of a nightmare for them. Although Nawaz Sharif is taking refuge here, and we'll come down to this as to what enables them to take refuge. All these people here, they take refuge in UK. This is the latest one, Pins and Files. And this was also investigated by this international journalist. And the full report is over here in this link. So because it's a recording, I'm going to be able to send it to you as well so you can look at that. It's a very, very good thing there, and also some other links that I have. See, it uncovered more than 2 trillion in suspicious bank transactions. This is what these international journalists, criminal investigation journalists, have looked at. Because it is so secretive, it's very difficult for them to get hold of the information. But they have been very good. They managed to get hold of about 400 journalists all over the world and ask them to sort of investigate, and they've compiled some reports which hopefully can be acted on. Now, these are the big banks which are involved as well. See, JP Morgan, big US bank, moved money for companies linked to organized crime members and to former Ukrainian president. So you've got these big names who are part of this whole setup. Deutsche Bank as well, cleared billions in transactions for anonymous clients. These Benelux countries, that they're quite sort of an attractive place for a lot of money laundering to start. Standard Chartered processed charity payments for Arab bank clients, despite possible links to terror financing. So very much part and parcel of them in that network. HSBC moved money for suspected launderers and fraudsters while on probation. So they see what they do is they do this and then they pay the fines and they carry on doing the same thing because the sort of the legislation is not sufficiently strong to be able to stop that activity totally. Now, what is being done by all this dirty money? See, and what is the extent to some of the numbers, if you put it to it? Counterfeiting activities, that's amounting to over $1 trillion worth. Drug trafficking, $750 billion. Illegal logging, human trafficking, illegal mining. That is what that is. Illegal wildlife trade. Yeah, this is all about ivory and so on. Crude oil thefts, small arms and light arm weapons. This is arms trafficking, organ trafficking, trafficking in cultural. This is when they steal the heritage of countries and bring them into the market and sell them. So this humongous, you see, we're talking about over $1 trillion to $2 trillion taking place. In one count, I think I'll mention that this is just to give you a little idea as to what other types of activities that are funded by laundered, not laundered money, but dirty money. Now, this is another very, very good program that I saw, which is looking at the capital of the world as being London for money laundering. So it considers that after Britain lost the empire, this became the second empire for Britain, having this immense amount of tax havens under their control. Okay, how did this whole business start of giving protection to launderers? it started like this. If I can just move this, I can read that, I suppose. Can put it here. Oh, can't move it. I didn't want to go down below. Ah, there we go. Oh, can you see the whole page? Okay, here we are. Okay, now in 1956, that was when the Suez thing started, and the empire had virtually gone, and UK lost that sort of thing that took place in Suez, and US was against that action by UK on Suez, uh, and that sort of US helped have a run on the sterling. That's one of the things that US wanted to try and diminish UK, which had a very strong financial role because of the empire. So US did a bit of mischief making as well on the sly. That's when the pound also dropped quite a lot in value. A lot of financiers withdrew money from London because of this situation as well. And Bank of England limited overseas lending to protect the pound because the pound started to slide quite a bit. And of course, UK was not able to invest abroad with the money that they had because it was not enough for them to have it go around. Not a lot of money had come in, therefore they couldn't lend it out again. So what the Bank of England did was allowed unofficially banks to use dollars. The euro-dollar activity kept separate from domestic activity. That's basically saying, let's not invest the dollars directly into our country, but we can use those dollars to invest in other countries. So Bank of England, they did assume responsibility for regulating this offshore activity. So essentially, the money that came in from outside stayed outside, but Bank of England had some control over it, but they did not sort of keep strict regulation on it. So this is really the prelude to the tax shelters coming about. So what happened was that London lawyers and accountants went to offshore UK overseas territories to drop rules of secrecy. And there's jurisdiction, like the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, Jersey, and so on. Now, just to give you a measure of how big that whole thing was, over 50% of global tax shelters are overseas UK holdings. So UK and the City of London became really the big players in this game. So the UK uses these Channel Islands called Alderney, Guernsey, Jersey, Sark, Isle of Man, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, Isle of Man, Gibraltar, Turks and Caicos Islands, Anguilla and Montserrat. So these are all the overseas holdings of UK, where every one of them has some sort of tax shelter for financial inflows coming in anonymously. And the expertise that allows these people to operate these banks in secrecy is all thought of and worked out in the City of London. Now, France uses a similar type of thing, but has a Monaco. Italy has this San Marino. Netherlands has all their particular, islands as well. So they're all into this game, but not to the same extent as UK. Now, what do these tax shelters essentially? They're doing illegal activity. And what is the illegal activity? It's market rigging, non-disclosure of conflict of interest, illicit arms trading, illicit political campaign donations, contract kickbacks, bribery, fraudulent invoicing, trade mispricing, real estate, tax evasion. Now all these, and this is something that has been brought out by a whistleblower called Jay Christensen, who worked for Deloitte at the Jersey. And he was able to look at 100 accounts um, in great detail as to what these people were doing with the money that was there in Jersey, for example. And it went into all these type of activities. So you can see it is really a big cover for doing all this illicit uh, financial flows. Now, euro market, how big is that? Over 5 trillion at 1988. And then, of course, you have a lot of this money that is there, sitting in there, is also used for international loans. So it becomes really a parallel economy, which is very large. Now, USA also did a similar thing because, see, what in 1960s when Vietnam and so on came about, there was so much money leaving USA, it was causing them a lot of concern because what was going to be happening was with that money that went out of USA, which to fund that wars in Vietnam, for instance, it could be exchanged for gold or to buy other currencies, so putting pressure on the dollar. So what the State Department said was ask Chase Manhattan to get these dollars back somehow. It failed initially, but later it wanted to become a little Switzerland, which was to try and attract that money that had gone out of USA. It then embarked on setting up through Chase Manhattan to get the flight capital and other illegal funds, like even drug money and illegal sort of cash. So you can see USA also started to, at the same time, because Britain started in 1956 and thereafter, and USA very soon after that. So this money that was going out was then getting it back into the country again in some ways. The legitimate way that usually happens is when you sell arms to, say, like Saudi Arabia, 60 billion or something they bought. So that money which they buy arms for gets paid from the oil that used to be imported by USA, for instance, or by the Europe. So rather than just having a one-way flow, these made it a two-way flow, making, in fact, not having a net outflow, because a net outflow means it causes problems for your own economy. So this is what, in fact, the USA started to do as well. So USA and UK are the big sort of players in this illicit funds. So we have City of London doing the work. That's one of the things. And it has the biggest lobby in Parliament overseeing its interests. City of London is like a little state within UK. It is very powerful. It has its own mayor. It has its own sort of police force, that type of thing. And the biggest way is that they have a lobby in Parliament which oversees any financial legislation that goes through it and make sure that it's not detrimental to the city or its interest in the sense of even these tax shelters as well. So UK gives protection to money coming in. Now you've heard of all these Russians coming in and so on, and they live here very nicely, but nobody sort of puts them into jail because there is an understanding between the City of London and Bank of England and the UK that they will give protection to the individual so long as the money somehow comes into UK and gets somehow controlled by UK. This I just put in because BCCI is one of those banks that grows up very quickly. In 7 years, it became one of the largest banks. They bought up Midland banks, in fact, but became bankrupt within 10 years because they started to do illicit, transactions. they used to have people with suitcases flying around the world with cash in them, and they got caught, and that's how they became. That's one reason. The other reason was, of course, much more, I suppose, the secret one is that they were involved in funding the nuclear program in Pakistan. And therefore, the whole world was up against that, and they brought this bank down very quickly. Now, what are the effects of? So one can say, right, uh, let's have this illicit money coming in, and we can use it for, through tax shelters and through other means of bringing it into the economy. So that money started to come into the economy as white money, if you like, but it had an unexpected effect on the economies of both of UK. It became a financialization of the economy, or it became a deindustrialization. Now, what do I mean by that? It means essentially that we moved away from becoming a manufacturing country to a financial services country. So you can see the effect of this illegal money having so much power that it changed the actual nature of the country. So the money went into financial speculation, that money into foreign currency trades and not into manufacturing. So that's why we have lost a lot of manufacturing in UK because of this particular situation. Now, this is just something that I thought I'll put up. At the twilight of the British Empire, bankers, lawyers, and accountants from the City of London set up a spider's web of offshore secrecy jurisdiction that captured wealth from across the globe and funneled it into London. So you can see this is, I've given you a link of this documentary that was put out. So you can have a look at that. It's an eye opener. They call it the spider's web. Second British Empire. Now, Attlee had a view on this as well. Attlee is one of the greatest prime ministers UK ever had. I would say probably the biggest, greatest, even better than Churchill and all the others. Over and over again, we have seen that there is another power than that which has a seat in Westminster. City of London is that power. A convenient term for a collection of financial interests is able to assert itself against the government of the country. Those who control money can pursue a policy at home and abroad contrary to that which has been said by the people. Even at that time in the 40s, you can see there is that sort of threat of how influential the city has been in London, and a sort of a law on to itself, and with a very powerful sort of backing in Parliament. Now, these are the solutions proposed, but I won't go into this all here. But quite simply, what it means is that if we know who the beneficiaries are, then you solve the problem. You see? It's as simple as that. If any international body needs to take any action to try and sort of make financial flows visible and legitimate, is to name the beneficiaries. Most of the game that gets played in money laundering and the tax shelters and all that is to try and hide the identity of the beneficiaries. So in simple terms, if you are able to identify the beneficiaries, we can solve the problem. Now, Imran Khan just last week, the 75th UN General Assembly meeting globally that took place over Zoom, he brought out some points, special concern with the money laundering. And I've put them down here for you. He said, looted wealth must be returned immediately. Because if you look at some of the poor countries, The poor countries are losing $1 trillion every year. That's money that is coming from their countries into the richer countries. Essentially, illegal flows by corrupt leaders bringing that money in. So he's saying the looted wealth must be returned immediately. Beneficiary countries must impose criminal and financial penalties. That is, like USA and UK, should impose criminal and financial penalties on people who are like enablers, like lawyers and accountants, who should be held accountable for doing this, hiding the criminal activity. And individuals who are beneficiaries must be revealed. As I said earlier on, if we are able to identify the beneficiaries, then we can access the funds and repatriate it to the poor countries. For continuing with that, he's also saying multinationals will not be allowed to shift profits to low cost. I mentioned about this Apple and Ireland, so that is very much a case there, because the rules are lax enough to do that. Corporate tax must be levied where revenues are generated, which makes a lot of sense. If in UK, Apple is making a lot of money, then Apple should pay taxes in UK. But they don't. They pay taxes in Ireland because Ireland's taxes are lower. And then, of course, these are other things basically saying that, those countries must be taking action led by the UN and having all the stakeholders participating in it. So essentially, he's talking about some real concrete action to be taken. Now, who's blocking all these measures? USA and UK. You see, they block actions on the tax shelters because they have so much control over all this illegal funds coming through their tax shelters. There are trusts that create to hide ownership. There's $50 trillion worth of assets in cash, art, real estate, gold, cars, and nobody is named as to who they are. So that's why the fundamental problem is we need to be able to identify who the beneficiaries are as far as this illegal money is concerned. In fact, 50% of all global wealth, that's the whole half of the global wealth hidden in tax havens. I mean, this is a humongously big figure. And what it also means is that we don't have enough taxes being collected. I know we have people like Trump who doesn't pay taxes at all, it's a disgrace. But he has these very high-powered lawyers and accountants who are very good at hiding all sorts of things. But it just goes to show that half the wealth of the world is used for nefarious purposes. And the good people, the working people are the people who pay the taxes, who carry the world, in fact. So here is another figure, 1 trillion lost each year by poor countries. And that money comes into countries like UK and USA through flight capital and tax evasion. And it goes into these tax shelters. Now, these are the countries with various types of attraction to the money launderers, these things in the red. They come in with all sorts of money, and this to the extent how much money comes into these countries. But in terms of where the GDP per head inflows come in, is this next one, which is this one. You see, Benelux countries are very, very high in terms of drawing the illegal money coming in. And in terms of another metric is this, it's equivalent to more than 200% of the GDP, which is a phenomenal big amount coming in. Now, EU started to do lots of research into this, and they have come out with this report. I think I've given you some details about that. Basically, they looked at the Panama Papers in great amount of detail because they were leaked out and therefore they had access. and they have concluded all what I've said before: hiding illegal activities, criminal identity, criminal ownership of assets, and so on. Now, this shows you the amount of money going in from tax havens. The ones on the top are the tax havens, right? There's Switzerland, and there's the Caribbean, and the United States. And these are where it comes from. The money, the dirty money comes in. Even the dirty money from Europe is quite big. This is really the 210, and this figure is in trillions. In 210, that's about 10 years ago. So if we're talking about today, it probably is about twice or three times these figures. So from Europe, it goes to Switzerland, trillion of that. United Kingdom, about $750 billion, and Luxembourg, $500 billion. So you can see this is telling you which region of the world is sending this dirty money, and where does it get sort of banked. It's in these countries, and this is the measure of how much. So you can look at that at your leisure. Okay, this is basically what I've just said. This is basically saying, this Vincent study, about 44 banks in India have been, known for money laundering. Some estimates that I sort of heard was that total money that has come away from India and banked into Switzerland and other havens is of this magnitude. So you can see a poor country gets looted by these elites. British government listed Pakistan among the 3 money launderings also. And that is because you had this Nawaz Sharif and Bhutto families who were looting the country. Now with the Imran Khan, he's put a stop to that, and all these people are facing court action. Okay, I just wanted to just mention a little bit about this campaign finance, because that anonymity is what causes a lot of upheaval and distortions in the economy. It used to be the case that individuals can fund campaigns because you are identified as an individual. But later on, the Supreme Court made some legislation, which I think was a retrograde step. They said, no, companies can do that. And once you allow companies to fund campaigns, then these companies can be, illegitimate companies, unknown companies. So nobody knows who's behind this company. So they get away by hiding behind this facility that was given by the Supreme Court, probably not intentionally, but nevertheless is worked out not in the favor of the democratic process, because now you've got this campaign dark money, which is distorting the whole thing. Anybody who has lots of money can bring in guys who are incapable or incompetent to rule. So I'll stop over here, and we'll go to a Q&A. All right. I'll just unmute everybody. Okay, that should be unmuted. Right. Okay, you can unmute yourself if you're not unmuted, because I've unmuted all. Yeah. So, okay, if anybody has a question, I'll be quite happy to take it.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I'm sorry, I joined a little bit late, so maybe I missed something, but I'm not clear on the beginning of this chain, at the beginning of the money laundering. You said it's cash, but how do they have?
Well, what happens is like this. Let me give you an example. When you give a contract to somebody, you give a bribe, right, to get that contract. And that bribe is usually under the desk type of money. That's where the process starts. because it's not, you don't pay the guys in check, because that can be traced. So what you do is you give money. There's lots of examples of creating this illicit funds. Uh, One is, of course, the bribes. The other one is, of course, taking loans from banks on legitimate type of projects, but then declaring yourself bankrupt, and then this money is still there in your pocket, and that becomes, of course, again, unaccounted money. And that also sort of starts to wander around and seek a tax haven. Uh, so all this illicit activity is the one that leads to the creation of dirty money. And that's how we have, in a way, uh, the, uh, the, the reason why tax shelters exist, so as to draw this money into them and be used for whatever nefarious purposes they have in mind. Okay?
How can legitimately condone that? How can we say that's okay to have money I don't understand that. When they know the whole point of a tax shelter is to hide money, how come that's okay?
Well, the thing is the tax shelters, they make their money by keeping that dirty money with them, and don't tell the authorities who are the originating countries where the money comes from as to who owns that account. These are all secret accounts. So the people who keep these accounts are not identifiable in terms of uh, how much money they have got and in what form. Because the way that the City of London works is that when the money gets, it's just not sitting in an account like yours and my account in the local bank. These are accounts that go through innumerable companies from internationally, and therefore very difficult to know who's actually owning, who are the beneficiaries. Therefore, it's not a simple question of you and me having an account in our local bank where everybody knows that we are the ones. And that is the ultimate aim to solve this problem, that those people who bring in this dirty money, at least if they keep it there as dirty money and they're saying, okay, it belongs to Mr. Nawaz Sharif or Zardari, then one can grab hold of that money and send it back to the country. Whereas it's not possible to grab that money because that money has already left that jurisdiction and invested into 10 other countries with different
Are you going on now?
Hmm?
Are you going on now? Okay.
Sorry, is somebody saying something? Oh, John.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, okay, Jill. Giselle, go ahead.
You're saying that they can't find out who the beneficiaries are. Why can they not get hold of the people who have opened the accounts, investigate and really question them? Because they must have the information. Who are they opening the accounts for? And you don't let them go until you really find who they have opened the accounts for. Of course, they'll come out and tell lies at first. But
Yeah, well,
they need to come in really strongly. And I don't understand why they are not coming in more strongly, because if the UK, for example, does come in strongly, then they will benefit because they will get more with regards to the taxes that they're not getting. And you know, all the others, you were saying, all the other benefits is that it's being taken from countries who badly need it. The other thing is we're supposed to be fighting terrorism. And if this is funding terrorism, this is
exactly.
appalling. When we see all the terrorism that's been happening, you know, just in recent years, they're trying to stop this, I thought.
Yeah. Well, this is it. You see, there are the regulations regarding drugs and terrorism. It's a bit more stronger regulation and regulation. But those dealing with other types of illegal cash flows, they are not so firmly regulated. That's why Imran Khan, when he spoke about it at the UN just 3-4 days ago, he said that the regulations that apply to drugs and terrorism must be the same, to the same extent, be applied to the looted money that comes from the poor countries. And he's asking for a similar type of, if you like, penalties. At the moment, you've got, I went to the local shop in Houston, and I went into a shop over there, and outside that shop was this huge custom-made car that looked like a big Rolls Royce with a chauffeur. And there was an old lady that came out, and I asked the guy, he said, "Who's this old lady?" And he said, "Well, she's the mother of this big industrialist come entrepreneur from India who has taken about $9 billion worth of loans from the Bank of India or for various banks, and he's taking shelter over here." Now, the lawyers are so smart, and the political sort of things are such in this world that if you have a lot of money, then you can get away with anything. So this guy has not been able to be extradited by the Indian government, and he's here. And the same thing applies to a lot of these Russian people who are here with tons of money, and who have, they're not able to get them. The total number of amount of money that has actually been retrieved is only 1%. If you look at that documentary that I just mentioned over there, so immense amount of influence is being exerted to give protection to these very rich individuals simply because they have all their money stashed away either here or in these tax shelters, which are controlled by the indirectly, ultimately by both UK and USA.
I think George wants to say something.
Where is George? Yeah, go ahead, George.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, that documentary you mentioned is on Amazon Prime Video. You can get it if you've got Amazon Prime. The Panama Papers. I saw that in the about a year ago in the Curzon. They had a one-off showing of it, and it turned out that most of these accounts, there was some poor woman living in a barrio or a favela in one of the worst parts of Costa Rica, of all places. Costa Rica is quite a good country, but they do have their slums there. And there's a woman who's living in the slums, can't speak any of the languages that the interviewers were asking her. And she's the beneficiary, well, she's the name for millions of accounts, which, like it's in the Panama thing. And one of the reasons why David Cameron had to leave so quickly when he got kicked out of being a prime minister was because he was one of the ones who was laundering money there. And no, he denied it in Parliament, and then about a week later he had to leave because he was found out. And the other thing is the Americans were using it to fund up the Contras in Nicaragua in 1987. That was all done by Ronald Reagan, and most of the people in government now have got links to these banks and all sorts of things. So unfortunately, they treat the public as as we're known as cattle.
You see, to the earlier question also, right now, because these people are going through the courts, a lot of information is coming out. A lot of these people are having accounts in the servants' names and the local sort of, fruit seller or a bicycle stand guy. All these people's names are being used to hold accounts into banks worth several hundreds of thousands of dollars and pounds, because without their knowledge, their identity is being used. And this is how the big network of illicit world works. They have so many ways of hiding the dirty money that most countries are not very interested in pursuing it, because there's, especially the rich countries, it is benefiting them in some way, whereas it's impoverishing the poorer countries, because a lot of capital is going out.
Yeah,
Can I
sorry,
ask you
Shafiq,
Yeah, Nimi, you had something? Yeah.
I do a couple of things. Sorry, Giselle, just one sec. You talk about the poor countries, and of course, it's absolutely right. It shouldn't come from there. And you said Imran Khan, one of his points was that this money should be sent back to those countries. Now, the thing that occurs to me is, if you send this money back to all the Nigerian dictators, the Asian dictators, they'll just take it and put it back in their pocket and try and hide it somewhere else. So I'm not sure how much benefit that does to the poor people or to the average person in those countries. That's one thing. The other point I wanted to make was, we always seem to get slightly confused about lawyers and accountants and blame them for these things, whereas the simple thing is, either you're avoiding or you're evading tax. One is illegal, the other isn't. As a lawyer, if you do your homework and you find loopholes which are legal, then you are clearly going to use them for the benefit of your client. Now, we had this thing about, oh, it's not moral. Well, moral is one thing, legal is another. If you do staying within the law, it's up to Parliament then to make sure that there aren't the loopholes which they think are going to be so difficult. And the third thing that occurs to me is, now if you try to, open an account anywhere, they ask you hundreds of things, thousands of things, even, if it's obvious it's come out from your employers, taxes being paid, and you're opening an account, but you're made to feel like a criminal. So how these people get away with so much cash, I don't really understand at all, as Ruth said, because, for people like us, if you're trying to open an account anywhere and it's anything which doesn't look 100% kosher, even if it is, they ask you millions of questions, and you're made to feel like a criminal when you've done nothing wrong. So how do these people get away with it all?
That's why I think they have tax shelters where they open the accounts in the names of people who have this dirty money, the legitimate money that we all operate with, we go through the local laws and so on. But in the case of tax shelters, the laws are not so sort of strict.
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but I know if you try to open an account in Jersey, it's not a secret account at all. The government has all your details. You have to give them everything. So maybe in the past it was more like that, but now I don't think it is anymore. So,
Well, from
Stanley Kubrick tried to expose this in the film Eyes Wide Shut. I don't know if you saw that film, Eyes Wide Shut. And he was dead before the film finished. And these are international gangsters, and they're running the governments in all the countries. Doesn't matter who they are, Conservatives, Labour, Democrats. They are big fish. We are just little people to them. They hassle you for opening up, a bank account, or if your gyro doesn't turn up, you pinch a loaf of bread to feed your children, on a Thursday afternoon, you get a criminal record, while these people are international gangsters and they are in control of us.
Yeah, well, one of the things that came out when I was looking at this is that the Bank of England is not fully, in fact, controlling the operations of the tax shelters. Although they are part of the UK overseas territories, those banks, they have the Bank of England, who has given them basically an unwritten rule saying, go ahead and do these type of things. We won't sort of catch you out. So there is less regulation of these tax shelters than what UK does on its own banks locally.
You can't ask questions about the Bank of England in the House of Commons. There's, people think it belongs to England, but there is a small percentage of people, I think it's 4% of the bank is owned privately, and they are the ones who are running everything. There's a man sits next to the Speaker in the House of Commons who's a representative of the Bank of England.
Yeah, the city guy also sits down there.
Yeah, and you are not allowed to ask questions about the bank, even though you may have the illusion that it belongs to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyhow, the fundamental thing that we all are looking for as a solution is that we should know who the beneficiaries are. And at the moment, because of the complexity of the whole thing, we are not able to know that money can be accessed easily. It can't, it's because every leader that comes in does promise to bring the dirty money back, but they can't. They just don't know where that money is sitting. So there is a very complicated web that is spun that makes it quite impossible to get hold of it.
Can I just ask?
It's thanks to the great expertise of accountants and lawyers. Okay, Nimi, you say that there is avoidance and evasion, but at the end of the day, what I think is necessary is to be able to sort of at least hold somebody accountable, like these big companies like Apple, who's not paying enough tax here. And even today, I think just the other day I read that the HMRC, head of HMRC, is trying to get more money out of Apple simply by making a deal with them, saying, look, you pay us a certain amount of money and we'll let you go. So it seems to me that it becomes a very individual transactional type of a deal that the HMRC is doing, rather than coming out with a rule which says that if the revenues are generated in UK, then you must pay the tax in UK. That at the moment is not the practice that they're following. And that's why it requires a global action on the part of trying to make sure that every country does get a certain amount of tax which they're entitled to. At the moment, these big corporates are taking advantage of the sort of lack of rigorous thinking in terms of corporate taxation, worldwide, to profit from it by just banking the money and not being taxed, for it. And what at the end of the day it results in is that the poor people who are working very hard and for a little bit of money they pay. The amount of money they earn, they pay. And that little money is the one that carries the whole country.
So Shafiq, can I ask you a question? Sorry, I know Giselle was going to say something, so I don't know if she wants.
Yeah.
Giselle, do you want?
Can I just, sorry, go ahead, Nimi.
No, after you.
I just wanted to ask that surely the banks are being very lax. If a bank account is being opened by someone, they see this name, thousands are coming into this bank account and they make inquiries, right? What is his occupation? What does he do? They can find out quite soon. He's a fruit seller in the market. Well, quite obviously there's fishy business going on. They must be very lax if they're not asking more questions and find out more about this man, because obviously he's not the one who's bringing in the money.
Yeah, well,
Why don't they?
You see, there are two countries, right? One is the poor country where the theft is taking place. The other one is the rich country where the money is coming in. The money coming into the rich country benefits the economy one way or another, and it loses in the poor country. So the rich country who is supposed to try and bring in some legislation and regulation, they are a bit hesitant. As I said earlier on, US and UK have not, in fact, have blocked regulation on this illegal flow of funds because it benefits them. And that's why That's why no action is taken. Like all these SARs, like the suspicious activity reports that the banks collect, the millions of these reports that are collected, but they're not acted upon by the government, because that is the area they want to be able to sort of say, well, you know, we don't want to go into it because it sort of is not in their interest. This is what these countries are saying to themselves. It is not in the interest of rich countries to bring in this type of hard regulation that they have for drugs and for arms trading or for terrorism. This other thing, which is illegal, that's tax that Nimi talked about, the evasion and the avoidance of tax, that sort of thing, that they're lax on. And that is the money that is humongous amount of money. That is like Apple has taken so much money out of UK and not sort of benefited the UK residents because they don't pay the tax, you know?
Well, that was my point about whether they do it because they run it past their lawyers and accountants and it's legitimate. What I wanted to ask you, however, was this. So when Amazon and or Apple are doing this by taking advantage and they go to Ireland and pay very little tax, I know that for American citizens, they have to pay tax on their income anywhere in the world. Regardless of where they are. How does that apply to their companies? So are these companies paying tax in America or are they not paying it there either?
Well, I mean, when it comes to individuals, I think, the governments are very good. I had an account in Switzerland and immediately the bank told me that, look, UK authorities want to know everything about this account and so on. I said, yeah, go and tell them. I just got about a few thousand francs there. So my son-in-law said, look, it's best to close it rather than sort of just, go into all this formalities. So I just closed it. So individuals are pursued very, very sort of, thoroughly. But when it comes to big corporations, they have the big lawyers trying to sort of block all sorts of moves that are possible. So, Apple has got this money sitting in one of these Caribbean islands of 200 billion, I think, no small sum. They've got that thing parked in there, the money. But if they bring it into USA, there'll be tax. But if it's sitting there, they don't have tax.
I thought with individuals, it's whatever income they have, regardless of whether they take it to the States or not, that they have to pay tax on it if it falls within the rules. So are you saying that Apple, etc., they can make their billions abroad and that's not at all taxable in the US?
That's because the corporate world has the ways and means to be able to do that, whereas individuals can't do that so easily.
No, not ways and means. Legitimately, is it permitted? Is that American law?
Yes, yes, that's why they're doing it. That's why they're doing it. Because see, America also has the equivalent of these tax shelters in its own area. And they've got these tax shelters with money sitting in there. And they are sort of getting away, like people get away in our tax shelters over here.
Yeah. But I mean, I think one of, Imran Khan's points are good and valuable because I think one of the biggest problems is, and I've mentioned it before, with African dictators who steal everything from the country and go and put it abroad. And I think the fact that the West permits that to happen is a really sad state of affairs.
Yeah, but Imran Khan's point is that that money is stolen by these people, which belongs to the people of that country. And therefore, when that money gets back, it doesn't go back to these dictators or to these thieves, but rather he's already got a program that is going to funnel that money into education for the country. So he's already declared that as to whatever amount is retrieved will go for these particular activities. It won't go back to the individuals.
Yeah, well, that's great. But I mean, in Pakistan, he may do it. But can you imagine Nigeria when Mugabe was around, would just go back into their hands and they would hide it somewhere else?
Well, I think the first thing would be to try and get hold of that money. That money is quite impossible to get hold of. That's why even after 2 years, the amount of money that Pakistan has managed to get is of the order of $1 billion, I think, not a lot. compared to maybe whatever, like a 500 billion sitting out there in illegal funds abroad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, there's also the money from drugs as well, which is big business for the American economy. Everyone knows that this originally started with Father Bush, not Boy Bush, but his father was the one who started off the cocaine in the United States, and that's also big money. And all these people are involved in this. The worst thing is the poor people, the ordinary people in the world who just have to put up with this rubbish, the way that they're being pushed around now by this virus thing. It's never been any different.
Yeah. Well, I heard this morning that I think Trump has only paid $750 in 2016 as tax.
He's paid a lot for his hair, hasn't he?
Yes, exactly.
It was a waste of money.
Exactly.
I mean, when you've got this amount of evasion and avoidance, or whatever you may call it, you can, thank the lawyers and the accountants for that, and being able to sort of get away with that.
What I find depressing with this thing about Trump, we see this. So either, his supporters who really support him to this day, they either think he's a really rich man, so he must be very clever. And if he hasn't paid any tax, that was clever as well. What they don't seem to be bothered about is the fact that he's either a liar, because he's obviously it's all fraud, he hasn't paid any tax, or he's stupid because he hasn't made any money. But if in spite of all those things, people are prepared to make him the president of the USA, then I think we've got really big problems in the world.
It's not just them, Shafiq. Look at the royal family, right? Who are not English anyway, they're German. They don't pay any tax. We actually give money to the Queen, who's the second richest person in the world, apparently, the third richest. We actually give her money.
Biggest landowner, I think, in UK.
Yes. She's worth millions, billions, and we give her money. What is people sleeping up on the streets of England?
But the amount of tourists we have because of them more than pays back the money they take from the taxpayer.
Oh, nonsense.
You may think so. I don't have anything against the royal family.
Well, I mean, as far as the accountability is concerned, I'm very heartened by the fact that there is some accountability taking place, at least in Pakistan.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether that's happening anywhere else, but at least there, I'm following it closely enough to be able to see all the moves that the criminals are making to try and avoid. Just today, I think one of the big names was taken into custody. He's the leader of the opposition, in fact, currently. The other one, I think, is in hospital. I think he's been declared as having a 50% share in one of these big companies with him and his son. So all these things are coming out really, little by little, and it shows us to the extent of how deep-rooted that corruption has come about in countries. And this is a very clear lesson for every country to look at and see the ways that are being used to loot the country, and also to how to avoid the legal process as well, which is what's happening right now.
Shafiq, do you think Modi is in it as well?
Modi, I think Modi promised to bring back the dirty money. You remember when he first came in the same way that he said he was going to clear up the Ganges from all its filth?
Yeah.
Well, all that is forgotten because, he's got into league with the big names, the Reliance Group people, the Ambani brothers, who are billionaires many times over. and they are funding his sort of campaign and all the other stuff. Therefore, he keeps quiet, you know.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah, but this thing that today's announcement, this FinCEN thing by the U.S. Financial sort of watchdog has identified 44 Indian banks as being involved in illegal money sort of flows, and therefore the international bodies are asking the question: where did that money go? Not just it was illegal, but what was it used for? Because, you know, a very big question is that if the answer is that it's gone into fund terrorism and things like that, which certainly it has to some extent, then they can be put into something called the FATF list, which means that you're a terrorist sponsoring country, and then a lot of trade and commerce is affected. So it's a very, very big thing.
Okay.
Okay, now
Thank you.
if everybody is happy, we can sort of
Pack up.
say, I'll send you, if any of you want the recording of this, I can send it to you. So send me an email. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Until then,
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
very interesting.
thank
Thank
you
you.
for all your
Bye.
participation and
Bye.
contribution.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.